golden temple, submerged deep in nature's shade. Sturdy do we stand.
Ghost of Tsushima slaps harder than an Irish mother with a wooden spoon. Now, if you're not Irish, that may sound like child abuse, but Irish people will know it by its true name, child abuse. In a year of countries literally being on fire and the world having to reenact the worst parts of the film Contagion, Ghost of Tsushima was a single glimmer of joy in a pretty shit time. Sucker Punch's second and undoubtedly best game on the PS4, Ghost of Tsushima is an action-adventure open-world game, which is heavily inspired by the works of famed film director Akira Kurosawa. Who? For those not in the know, Kurosawa is probably the most famous Japanese director ever. Notable for his samurai movies and having said movies stolen adapted into westerns. Yet Ghost doesn't so much adapt Kurosawa's work as it emulates his cinematic style and applies it to a video game. You play as Jin Sakai, a samurai protecting the island of Tsushima from a brutal Mongolian invasion, which acts as a staging ground for the conquest of the Japanese mainland. But come on, the samurai were badass peacekeepers versed in combat and warfare, not to mention they have the home field advantage. There's no way they could lose, and oh my god, he's on fire. Okay, first round didn't work out like we thought. Let's take a knee, figure out how to get our uncle back and wait, no, Jin, don't use the front door. What the hell are you doing?
I failed my uncle.
No shit!
Now, just because you made a game about samurai doesn't mean it's Kurosawa inspired. Like, Sekiro and Nioh don't feel like one of his movies, so what does a game need other than a black and white Instagram filter to achieve this feeling? You've probably heard someone describe the setting of a book or a film as its own character. Now, despite that being the single most pretentious thing you could possibly say about Sex and the City, what does this mean? Kurosawa's movies are synonymous with movement. There's always some form of movement in a shot, be it from the characters, the world around them, or hell, even the pace of the narrative. The environment is used especially in conjunction with the emotion of the scene to highlight the feelings Kurosawa is trying to invoke. It just makes his locations feel alive and lived in. The environments are as expressive and energetic as the characters, and this is important when stories like Seven Samurai or Yojimbo are about risking life and limb to defend a location. You need to care about the place as much, if not more than the people, and Ghost of Tsushima very much wants you to fall in love with its setting. I mean, how could it not with vistas like this? Unlike something like New York, the Isle of Tsushima doesn't have 100 years of cinema to rely on. In fact, I didn't even know it was a real place until I played the game. Seriously, it's a teeny little island in between South Korea and Japan, and due to its relative obscurity, audiences won't have an immediate connection to Tsushima as a setting. So the game really needs to establish why you should care about it. I mentioned in my video on Nier Automata that there is one surefire way you can create a connection to the player.
Tight jeans, double D's, making me go.
However, Nier was trying to connect you to characters, so sadly Ghost of Tsushima can't use the same methods. Unless...
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I f***ing hate video games, because this is what it does, it appeals to like the male fantasy.
Jokes aside, the entirety of the game's design is dedicated to making you connect with the world, both narratively and mechanically. This is so both the player's goals and Jin's are aligned. I mean, the first hour of the game is this pre-scripted tutorial for combat and a bit of stealth, but right after Jin takes up amateur bungee jumping, you're given complete access to travel the southern third of Tsushima. It immediately juxtaposes the violence and desecrated villages seen in the intro sequence, which shows who you're fighting, and transitions to this open field as the sun begins to rise, and a forest of golden leaves shimmer in the background, showing you what you're protecting. This first act of the game does a fantastic job of creating a connection to the island. Unlike most open world games, there's no mini-map. This is because mini-maps, while useful, take up valuable screen space, and ultimately may be unnecessary. Hell, how many of you guys noticed that I didn't have the mini-map in my Spider-Man video? Ghost of Tsushima ditched them in favor of a guiding wind, similar to Yojimbo, again taking inspiration from Kurosawa, but adapting it to gameplay. This also alleviates the immersion break of having to constantly divide your attention to different parts of the screen, but also forces the player to learn the lush world of Tsushima. The environments also reflect Jin's mindset, offering a glimmer of hope in defeating the Mongols. Sure, they've spread wide and far through the island, but there's a level of untaintedness in many of the locations, as if it can still be salvaged. Yet the map isn't just used for narrative progression, it's also used for mechanical advancements. You're constantly encouraged to stray off the beaten path in the game. I mean, following a fox to a shrine allows you to equip charms, augmenting your various stats, and golden birds can lead to side missions, hotspots, springs, bamboo stands, shrines, and haikus. The more you as the player interact with the island, the better equipped Jin is to protect Tsushima. But it doesn't just stop there. Jin himself just seems to feel really comfortable on Tsushima, as if he's a part of it. His 4 fighting styles are embodiments of nature: stone, water, wind, and moon. And there's a certain fluidity to his movements, whether it be chain standoff kills, switching stances, or scaling the mountains of the island. Not only does this connect the game's design philosophy to Kurosawa's use of motion and environment, but there's something so natural about it all. Plus it all helps that it makes you feel like a badass.
Oh my god, he's so goddamn cool!
The notion of the environment reflecting Jin's mindset and character isn't just locked to the first third of the game. It permeates the entirety of the experience. When the second act opens with this farmland completely decimated, burnt to the ground by the Mongols to starve the people of Tsushima, you understand how dangerous they still are. The environments you encounter in this region are also much more bleak and ominous. The first main village is shrouded in fog, as unaware of the Mongols' intentions as Jin is, again using the environment as a narrative tool to augment the story's emotions. One thing that's interesting is how often the Mongols try to corrupt the island of Tsushima, whether it be trying to coerce Jin's uncle to bend the knee, recruiting the displaced wandering ronin of the island, or even using the local poison as weapons. There's something rather perverse and disgusting about it. Most, if not all of Jin's legendary techniques are only acquired so as to not allow them to fall into the hands of the Mongols. The Heavenly Strike, the Armor of Gosaku, the Demon Bow, these are all potential targets by individuals trying to gain favor with the Mongols and to be turned against the people of Tsushima. Yet all these treasures of the islands become tools for Jin, as if the island wants only him to have them, which is appropriate when you realize Jin's arc is about transitioning from a champion of the island to becoming a living embodiment of its will. But aren't they the same thing? Not really. You see, the samurai stuck to an extremely rigid code of ethics and practices. Sure, they killed people, but they'd tell you about it ahead of time.
Slaughtering you all, wait and you see. Get up here!
But again, the game ties this character progression into nature, with it being a gradual change. At the beginning of the game, Jin is a perfect samurai. He's all about honor, adhering to the same code as his uncle and fellow lords. He's even so married to this idea that he's willing to die a rather pointless and downright avoidable death just to uphold these values. Now, you may think that this is insane or downright suicidal, but from the perspective of Tsushima, samurai are all the island has ever really needed. The only other major conflicts that have happened are between untrained bandits and other samurai, so before there was no reason to question their code. Yet as soon as the Mongols arrive, the samurai's ideas of honor and their rules of engagement are actively turned against them. While raised under this code and benefiting from its training, Jin seems to constantly be at odds with it and how inefficient it can be. While reluctant, Jin starts to bend his code in Act 1, and only by Act 3 does he fully accept himself as the ghost. Much like nature, it's not an instantaneous process, it's a gradual one. He's adapting to environmental change and compensating for it. We also see many of Tsushima's attributes reflected in Jin. He can be exceptionally tranquil and reflective, yet he can quickly flow into violence when necessary and then return to a zen state moments after, like a sudden thunderstorm, which will occur more frequently the more you, the player, act like the ghost. Game design, yeah! This journey from samurai to force of nature's final stages take place in the snow-covered northern point of the island, which is appropriate given how winter represents an end to things. Here there's only one settlement area and everywhere else is occupied or destroyed by the Mongols. Death is everywhere here, and you could argue that Jin in a sense dies here. He allows the samurai in him to die and in turn becomes the ghost, a force of death seeking nothing but justice for Tsushima. Now that's not to say Jin's philosophy is flawless. It forces him to engage in some pretty extreme acts of violence, the Mongols target his friends, and because of his actions, Jin's only family gets into hot water with the shogun and is forced to talk to Jin about it. Yet despite that, Jin is unmoving in his resolve to maintain his path and adapt to situations as they come. It may not be fair and it may hurt innocent people like Lord Shimura, but much like a hurricane or earthquake, sometimes nature is a little uncaring about the people who just happen to live on this planet. Then again, we did create NFTs, the dumbest thing to damage the environment since the BP oil spill.
Sorry.
Also, Jin isn't blind to the downsides of his approach either. He's willing to admit when he's wrong, and he knows the samurai are still needed. Kind of like how a garden needs a gardener to tend to it, Tsushima needs this force of nature in Jin and the samurai so it can flourish. I don't know guys, I'm just really hard pressed to name more open world games which marry the world and game so thoroughly. In a time where game worlds keep getting bigger and bigger, yet are unable to justify their scale, something with as much polish as Ghost of Tsushima just stands out even more. I mean, the whole reason this video is coming out when it did is cause I'm so excited for the Iki Island expansion. Despite the weirdness surrounding the upgrade to PS5. But what do you you guys think? Am I simping for a poor man's Assassin's Creed? What did you think about Ghost of Tsushima? Oh, and thanks to Marcus for the additional VO. Say hi to the people, Marcus. Great stuff. Don't forget to sub, like, dislike, ring that bell for notifications on upcoming videos. Follow me on Twitter to say, good job, Kev. Let's go play catch.